morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from around the world. Thank you for joining our live session. You're all very welcome to be with us. Before we get started, I'm sure many of you are familiar with video conference software now, but I just wanted to remind you that we are recording the session and it will be shared publicly to our social media and YouTube channel after today's event. We've been collecting some questions throughout the week as part of Online Learning Week, which we will go through shortly, but you can of course ask questions as the discussion is taking place. To do that, you can either use the chat panel or the Q&A panel, which I think is across the bottom of your screen there, and we'll do our very best to get through all of the questions today. If we run out of time, for whatever reason, I will ask Lindsey to write some answers that we can send out to you all via email. Alternatively, if you think of some questions after today's event or would like some more information, you can contact us directly. I will be sharing our email addresses again at the end of the session. We will, of course, get back to you as quickly as we can around other roles and responsibilities like technical support. So we're well underway with our live Q&A sessions as part of Online Learning Week, and this is actually our third one of the day. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my colleague and good friend, Lindsey Arnold. Lindsey has racked up an impressive amount of knowledge from working in the industry before joining AVA in 2014. Now, some of you may have seen our separation content that we shared earlier throughout the week for Online Learning Week. But we're going to really tap into Lindsey's knowledge to try and break down what is sometimes perceived as being a tricky situation, and that is, of course, the world of separations. So before we get started, thank you for joining us, Lindsey. Do you want to start off by sharing a bit of an insight to your knowledge and your experience in your career journey so far?
Hi, Jo. Hello, everyone. I will do my very best. So I started as an apprentice in the textiles industry, and I learned everything from the ground up. Back in the day, we didn't have the joy of the Macintosh, so it was all done by hand. Paintbrushing, photography, and all done on film in black and white. So today, when you think it's difficult to do separations in colour, imagine what it was like to sort of do it in black and white. But I started there, and then I worked even back then with AVA as a partner to develop the software for these specific industries at a little place called Langley Screens, which unfortunately is no longer with us, like many of the old mills in Macclesfield. And then I moved on to the wall covering industry and dabbled in a bit of packaging, engraving, all different types of repro, and finally decided to have a little change of scenery and share my knowledge, hopefully, with people via AVA. And that's where we are now. So Excellent. Here I am.
Cool, and we're very glad that you're here now.
Thank you.
So we'll get stuck into the questions that we've received over the week, starting off with one that's quite relevant for Online Learning Week. When you were learning and training to be a separation artist, what was your biggest learning curve?
Everything. So the thing was, I thought I had a pretty good idea of what it was, until I was immersed in it, and then I realised that there was so much more to it, and especially, as I say, with the types of medium that I was using, and like I say, compared to a computer now, sort of even down to creating the repeat of the file, painting it in different layers, it was very different. And of course, you wouldn't have scanned artwork. You would start with textiles, fabrics, and you would have to, I suppose, create and copy exactly what was there. And what you can do with a computer now to what you would do by hand back then is very different. With a computer, you can pretty much get exactly what is there. And this involved a lot of skill, which I'm not sure I had until I was taught by a lot of very skilled artists. And when I say artists, I mean in the true sense of the word. So it was quite daunting for a 17-year-old with all this massive amount of talent and experience around me. But I believe I started in the best place, and I learned a lot from those people. So it was a double-edged sword, really. It was starting at the bottom, but I think it gave me the best starting point and gave me a better understanding. And I think that's why I feel for people that start straight onto a Mac now, because they don't have the appreciation, I think, or the understanding of how those layers work together. So that is one thing that I think was a big learning curve for me. And I'd never done that type of photography, all these different things. So as well as being exciting, it was like, am I going to be able to do all this? But hopefully I wasn't too bad.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
You've probably touched on the next question that I've got here, which was when you first learned about separation. So was it when you first got your job? Is that where you first learned about them? Was it taught in education? And then the second part of the question is, how hard was it to take it on board?
So I knew nothing about, well, we touched on screen printing, but as with a lot of the universities that we find now, the way that it's sort of, there isn't a great deal of detail to it. So you've got an idea in your head of what it's going to be, but then the technicalities of it are, there's a lot more to it. So there was that side of it that I had to learn about, and how, again, there are different inks, there are different screens, there are different methods, airbrushing and painting. So these were all skills that I learned. But no, we'd not done a great deal of that before. And as I say, this was a full-on apprenticeship, so I learned everything from the basics. So for me, I just wanted to start working and get earning, whereas a lot of my friends went to university to learn these skills, and not to sort of dash their experience, but I think for me, being in the trenches somewhat, I think that was a better way of picking it up and learning, like I say, on the job more than anything.
Yeah.
So sorry, Joan, I forgot what was the next bit of the question.
It was just, how hard was it to take the separation technique on board?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, the beauty of it for me was having all that wealth of experience around me to support and mould me. So it was just taking baby steps. And I think when I'm doing my training now, I try and apply that in the same way, break it down. So it makes it a bit easier for people to understand it, because it is a skill, it is a huge skill, that I think is kind of, people just expect to be able to do it straight away, and they put a lot of pressure on themselves when they don't actually meet those expectations sort of overnight. But yeah, I think that's and I don't want this to sound like a sales pitch, but that was one of the great things for me, having AVA as that support as well. There were people at AVA at the time when I was learning the software as opposed to learning on the bench, that helped me understand going from handwork to the computer side of things. So yeah, I think it's always good to sort of surround yourself with people and to use that experience that you've got around you, if you have.
Yeah.
And hopefully you have, if you're starting as a SEP artist. For sure.
So it's a skill really that, one, you're probably personally quite grateful for learning from the industry itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Two, it's probably a skill that relies, I don't want to say heavily, but relies quite a lot on education and knowledge, and as you summarise it, the people around you and sharing the knowledge. So
sharing the knowledge.
We're very grateful that we've got you with us today to share your knowledge.
Hope so.
The next question is quite a nice one. What do you enjoy most about your work, or what do you enjoy most about separations?
Well, I suppose when I was doing it on the bench, it was the fact that I create something tangible, something that you could produce at the end of it, and be creative. That was something that I always loved. Of course, I think for most people, that's something you're born with. You're either good at this sort of stuff or you're not. And I can honestly say my mum probably can't draw a straight line with a ruler, but I like to think that I'm quite artistic. And that's what I really enjoyed about it, the fact that you produce something. And it's the same now. It's different on a Macintosh system. And obviously it's a bit different for me now. I'm working at AVA because what I love now is sharing that wealth of knowledge, and hoping that those sort of skills continue, because the old way of doing things is slowly, if at all, I see in Germany still a few studios that will have the computer systems, but they still use some of the old techniques for very difficult work. And I think it's sharing that with other people so that it sort of carries on. So now that I'm working with AVA, that is what I really enjoy. And back in the day, it was creating something that you could see and feel and knew that you'd put your own little touch on it. And it was a nice business to be in. Yeah.
Just picking up on something that you said, is separations a part of the industry that evolves quickly? Are there a lot of advancements and new technologies? Does it change a lot, or is it still always going back to the same original sort of ideas of the way that things work?
In the sense that how separations work, yeah, I think there's a sort of basic idea around that. But of course, it depends on the style of separation. So of course at AVA, we work with designers in textiles, we work in wall coverings, surfaces, which is very different to how I first started. And I think the technology has come on leaps and bounds. I remember when I used to do a separation job for a textile and have to hand paint and get all the films onto a screen. This could take weeks. Now this can be done in a few days. And in fact, with digital print sort of coming in now, you can take a garment, you can start a print in the morning, have a garment the next day, which to me is mind-blowing, because obviously I would sit there for weeks on end painting, sometimes thinking, when is this going to end? It's taking forever. But yeah, that is one of the real differences, and the speed. The speed and the quality of what you can reproduce. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Is there anything that you miss about the way that you used to do your separations?
I suppose in some respects it was, I love being covered in paint and just, I don't know, the variety of things that you did. And again, that still applies at AVA, because we're training, we're supporting customers, we're sharing our knowledge. But there, you could one day be painting, next doing photography. Sometimes if we were short, we would be cleaning the screens. It was just, and there was a real camaraderie around it. Getting the job done, we were under pressure to get things done, but at the same time. So working in a studio atmosphere was really good fun, with lots of different ages and different types of people. So I suppose that is slightly different to what I do now, because we have to sort of on support, you've got to kind of be pretty quiet because we're expecting customer calls in. So there's still that camaraderie, but we have to be a bit more serious, I suppose.
Not sloshing paint around in our...
Not sloshing paint around, no.
No, we wouldn't. We would be in the bad books, wouldn't we?
We would, yeah, for sure.
We've just had a question come in, which is a really nice one. What advice, or how could you summarise some advice to give to anyone who wants to start learning separations?
First and foremost, what I would suggest here is that you don't be too hard on yourself. Don't think that, it may click for some people overnight, but as I say, just give yourself the time to learn it for a start. and enjoy it. I think you've got to try and enjoy it, and rather than getting frustrated when you don't get the right results, just see it as a learning curve, because it is, and you will get there. And I think once you do, that was the great joy for me, to, however sad that sounds, the fact that I did go from feeling like this novice to then honing that skill. And it's when the penny drops and it clicks and you know what you're doing, and you think, right, okay, and all that fuss and all that concern about not getting things right, it kind of all drops into place at one moment. You'll just get that first job absolutely perfect and you'll think, yes, I've finally got it. So it is really exciting, and of course it's really nice to be able to copy something correctly and get the right results in production. So yeah, just hang in there and, like I say, utilise the knowledge that you've got around you.
There's a constant theme there, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, nothing to do with this. It really is about utilising other people's skills and knowledge to get you further up the chain where these things are concerned. And like I say, the more you do it, the better you'll become at it. Yeah. But it took me a while, and I'm very confident now in it, and most users that I've trained, happens to them as well. So yeah, we've got people now that were going, Lindsey, I'm going to give up, I can't do it, I'm rubbish at it, and now they're doing engraving work. So yeah, it takes time, but you will get there.
Cool. Patience is key.
Patience is key, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, this is another one that's been sent in, and it's similar to what we spoke about a couple of questions back. We've spoke about how the processes and technology has advanced for separations. But this question is, have the requirements on separations changed in the last couple of years?
So with digital becoming more to the forefront now, of course there's always been, for each style of separation, so like I say, for textiles versus wall coverings, there are specific rules that we have to adhere to anyway. Screens versus, say, gravure cylinders, there are different rules. The separations ultimately will be the same. You are splitting colours, you are breaking them down so that you can create lots of different colourways. And there are restrictions on how many colours you can use for each of those areas. But with digital, you can have as many colours as you want in respect. Obviously, you don't want thousands, because you've got to recolour this thing at the end of the day if that's what you're doing it for. But of course, where you're restricted, say in gravure printing, to say 8 cylinders, within digital, the reason that you can print as many colours as you choose is because there are no registration restrictions. Okay. So when you print on a screen or a cylinder, there is always going to be some movement on the press or when the engraving and the printing happens. So this is where you have to consider how much that is going to move out of fit. With digital separation, I can just see another question's come up, Jode. I'll just finish answering this. So with digital print, because you don't have that issue of movement on screens, you can, within reason, print as many colours as you want. But as we've said, due to recolouring that, if you have hundreds of separations, then it's going to be very difficult to make lots of different colourways quickly. So there are always things to consider for each style, analogue or digital. And we've had another question. Shall I read it out, Jode?
Yeah, I can read it out to you if you like.
Yeah.
Follow true form. So thank you for submitting this. If you're trained in digital separating, or it's all that you know, how difficult is it to offer separating for traditional printing, gravure or screen?
Okay. So, you're doing it, Jode.
There we go.
So if you've got the starting point of digital separations, the next stage, as I've just sort of indicated, is there are specific rules for screen printing and for gravure. And the reason for this is obviously, as I just mentioned, when you're printing lots of different colours in digital, it doesn't matter. But what you have to consider when you're printing on a flatbed screen or for gravure is there are things like the amount of ink coverage. That's quite important, because if you have too much ink on a fabric or even a paper, the substrate can get saturated. So there are specific rules around these types of things. There are maximum tone weights, maximum amount of layers on top of one another, and there are specific rules, and we do a lot of training based around these questions, because again, this is not something that is taught, I don't think, at a lot of the universities around. So it's definitely something as our customers we can advise you on, and if you are wanting to make that shift, of course there are things we can do to help you with it, but it's not a straightforward simple answer that I can sort of say on here. Those are the main things. The fact that you would need to have an overlap on your layers so that when the screens move out of fit, you don't get these, what we used to call winky whites, but basically where you saw the substrate through the colours, and you don't want to do that. So what you would use is an overlap or a grip, as we call it, and this would allow the press to move, but you wouldn't see any of the substrate coming through. So there is gripping to consider. There's maximum amount of colours over print, and there is a maximum amount of tone. And the difference there between screen and gravure is to get more detail in screen, you use a lot more screens to get that detail, because you have a limited amount of tone that you can print on a screen. So whereas on a gravure cylinder, you can pretty much print from around 5% tone up to 100. On a screen, for example, you may lose anything below 30% and anything above 70%. And I'm just using these as, numbers to sort of start with. Anything above 70% would go solid, and it would look a lot fuller. So these are the sort of things that you have to look at. So yeah, there is, again, another learning curve, but once you know the sort of media that you're working in, then it's just another set of rules that apply. And like you've learned with the separations, it's just a little bolt on to sort of extend that from digital. So the separation part is the most difficult part. So if you've learned that, the next stage should be okay with the right guidance, I'll say. Yes.
Okay. Hopefully that answered your question, whoever submitted it. If you do have more questions, feel free to contact us when we put the details up at the end if you've got any more questions for Lindsey. Alternatively, we still have a little bit of time, so pop your questions in the chat panel or the Q&A box. Something that I want to ask you, you mentioned earlier the different industries, so there's textiles, and for us at AVA, we've just done a talk about surfaces, which is flooring or furniture, wall coverings. Do certain separation techniques lend themselves better to certain industries?
Ooh.
Do you think? I know that's a little bit of a curveball thrown at you there. And
in the past, a lot of people doing surfaces. So, for example, when I'm speaking of surfaces, as Jodie just mentioned, these sort of surfaces tie in with wall coverings as well. And of course, on top of that, we have things like embossing to give us texture within these sort of styles of print. But when you are looking at, say, a textile job to a wood grain, for example. Back in the day, I can't possibly imagine trying to paint or draw a wood grain. It would have happened. There would have been certain ways of getting that information, but it's a very natural product compared to, say, a textile or a wall covering. So what a lot of people used to do is use CMYK separations for wood grains, and for very complex, and still actually in digital print now, they would use CMYK separations to get the various channels, because it gives you a nice amount of detail. But those colours can then be edited and made into spot layers. Whereas with a textile or a standard wall covering, you would tend to just start with spot layers, start creating masks, that sort of thing. So yeah, there are definitely different separation techniques. I tend to use all of them to get where I need to be as quickly as possible. So whatever gives me the best separation, the smoothest, or the best colour is where I will go with the types of tools. So yeah, it's a real mixture for me. But yeah, when I first started, I probably would have just used one tool because I was terrified of going in and trying lots of different things. But yeah, a mixture of all those things can really help you get some of these really technical separations. And wood grains are seem to be the most feared in the industry, to be honest. Whereas, like I say, with my background, I actually relish doing them. So, a bit of a challenge to get those nice, smooth looking woods. But yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So there was one more question that came in earlier through the week. I think you've probably answered it. I'll ask it again in case you want to summarise in any way. But
sure.
What do you have to consider when separating for analogue rather than digital? So you've spoke a lot about this, but I don't know if you want to add anything or summarise it in another way.
Yeah, so one thing that I would say that I haven't mentioned yet is, as I suggested with digital print, and I'm not saying that digital print is easy. In some respects, it can be more difficult because some of the designs can be a lot more challenging. You'll find that in digital, you'll use a lot of photographic stuff because it can be printed so much more easily than a cylinder. So, but what you also have to consider when you're going onto a screen or a cylinder, so analog versus digital, is that because you have to create these overprints and gripping situations, your files have to be clean and tidy, so that these can be sort of, the mass from your files can be utilised after. So if, for example, you're just doing quick colourways to get different colourways, there are different parts of the business, that is something that I never did. I would know when it came to my part what was expected but of each colourway. But yeah, that is one thing that's really important. You have to have the separations for analogue to a certain standard, whereas with digital, you can get away with a lot more because it's hidden within the print. So as I've said, when you are trying to get your separations onto a screen, you have to check there's no noise in the background, everything's nice and clean. And of course, when it comes to gripping it, you need those masks to begin with, and that isn't always the case with digital. So sometimes analog can be a bit more time consuming to get the end result, whereas with digital you can print very complex designs very quickly with, in some cases, little effort. So those are the advantages. But the other thing that's different is that digital only tends to do reasonably short runs in comparison to analog printing. So they're a couple of the main differences, really.
Cool. Thank you very much. That you're probably quite relieved that takes us to the end of our questions, unless of course anybody would still like to submit some. We've got the time. I don't know if you've got anything that you want to add on to the end of that, Lindsey. Is that all any other advice or tips, or
Oh,
are you all worded out?
I don't know. I think that's, yeah, I think again, there are different things to learn for different sort of areas of the industry. And as I say, we have the expertise at AVA to help with these things. So if you do have any questions about anything specific, we do have that wealth of knowledge here that we are absolutely desperate to share with you and help you on your journey. I think that's the best thing to say, Jode, because I could waffle on all day probably.
About separations.
Yeah.
No, it does seem like a mind-blowing world, but something that I've learned a lot about in the short time that we've been talking, 30 minutes.
Good.
But as you've stated, people can get in touch. So I will quickly share our contact details at the end there. We'll stay online for a little bit in case anybody wants to pop any questions in. We will still be here for a few minutes. But obviously, thank you for everybody who's joined us. Thank you for people who have tuned in throughout Online Learning Week. But most importantly, thank you, Lindsey, for sparing some time to share your journey and knowledge with us.
I hope it was useful.
I'm sure people took a lot away from that. So thank you very much. We'll stick around for a little bit if that's okay with you, Lindsey.
Sure.
And keep an eye out for any more questions. Thanks, guys. Here we go. We've got another question, Lindsey.
Yeah, we have.
Anybody still around? Let me just have a quick read of that. Can you summarise an answer to that?
Yeah, sure. So the question was, you've mentioned wallpapers, fabrics, flooring. What else could AVA separating skills be used for? Well, strangely enough, this morning, I was working on some separations for a gaming company, believe it or not. And we've done things like, we have customers that anything from garage doors, which does come under the surfaces, the flooring, things like your tabletops at home, your kitchen cabinets. Of course, we also do separations for weavers. So, of course, back in the day, people would have used the loom to create their patterns and little bits of paper and graph paper to do this. But we can also do that type of thing where we create a basic pattern in the software, and then that can be relayed to a weaver. And of course, there's packaging. So everything, and anything that you can print that has colour on it, I would say could be used, separations would be used for. But again, there are different sort of practices for that. Some people will use other softwares for specific types of printing. But yeah, the sort of industries that I've worked in have been fabrics, flooring, wall coverings. But of course, fashion is a huge one at the moment. And that sort of goes hand in hand with the digital printing at the moment. Fast turnaround. Yeah. We're all hungry for the new fashion on the streets. So yeah, that is another sort of one of our biggest customers, I suppose, Joe, does be along with all those others. So yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. Nice.
Okay.
A question added on the end there.
Yeah.
We're happy to stick around if there's any more. If anybody wants to shout up and ask any more, we'll stick around. I'll share the details again in case anybody wants to take our email addresses. Hopefully you can see all those now. Okay, well, thank you very much again. And feel free to get in touch with us if anybody has any more questions.